Hello and welcome to our discussion and our event provided by the MRC Researchers Society. I'm Joseph Livermore.
And I'm Allie Gaines. And we are the the co-chairs for the MRC's Researchers Society. I wanted to say I'm sitting here in New York. Joseph is over in London, and I think many people are tuning in from all around. So good morning and good evening, whichever suits wherever you are tuning in from. So today's discussion, we're very excited. We will be providing insight into the field of lifestyle medicine with three panelists, Dr. David Katz, Dr. Richard Pinder, and Dr. Amy Bannerman. I wanted to start out by apologizing. Dr. Saray Stancic will not be able to join us today due to a last-minute emergency, but we will miss her and we will have a great event anyway. So to briefly take you through what to expect over the next almost 2 hours. First, we will introduce ourselves. Like me and Joseph, I'm Allie Gaines. I'm a PhD candidate at Imperial College, and I'm studying nutritional epidemiology and sustainable diets. So that's how I sort of became interested in this space. Joseph, do you want to give a brief intro?
Sure. I'm Joseph Livermore. I'm a postdoc at Imperial College London, and I'm a centre member at the MRC CHE Centre for Environment and Health.
So we will give a little bit more of an overview of our Medical Research Council Center for Environment and Health. I will introduce lifestyle medicine to those who are new to the space, and then we will go ahead and introduce our panelists and get right into the panel discussion that Joseph and I will moderate. Then the final 30 minutes of this event will be a Q&A, so please remember that you guys can put your questions and comments into the comment box at any point, and we will be addressing those toward the end of the event. So make sure you add them in as they come into your heads. So Joseph, if you wouldn't mind kicking it off with the MRC Center.
Of course I can. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about the centre. So research at the MRC Centre for Environment and Health focuses on the study of how health effects are associated with environmental exposure. So the centre is based upon the principles of openness, transparency, inclusivity, and integrity in all of its work, with the primary goal of improving national and international public health and protecting future generations. Our goal is to establish a high-quality training and career development program for PhD and early career postdoctoral researchers, with a focus on quantitative sciences and a multidisciplinary and transferable skills in environment and health research. I'm obviously the second half of, or the better part maybe, of the co-chair of the MRC CHE Researchers Society. And this is obviously just to demonstrate some of the guys that are involved with the group.
Thanks so much, Joseph. Actually, you can go back to sharing the screen because next I will give a brief overview of lifestyle medicine. So like we said, today's discussion will focus on lifestyle medicine, and interestingly, the perspectives from both British experts in lifestyle medicine as well as American experts. So I think that will be a very cool perspective to get. For those of you who don't know, lifestyle medicine, as defined by the American College of Lifestyle Medicine and the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine, is the use of evidence-based therapeutic intervention revolving around 6 pillars. First is a whole food, plant predominant eating pattern. So this often includes, or in the field of lifestyle medicine, this includes coaching on how to shop for foods, prepare healthy meals, and stay motivated to eat mindfully in different situations. So it's a lot more than just prescribing a diet. It's a culture and creating a lifestyle around it. The second pillar is regular physical activity. So this focuses on making physical activity and exercise a habit and not a daunting task in your life. So this often is done by engaging in group fitness activities and getting into a routine of moving and opting outdoors with other people as well. The third pillar is restorative sleep. This means the amount of sleep as well as the restfulness of the sleep you're getting. So I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand at their first glance at restorative sleep. So a lot of things that can help with this is minimizing your screen time before bed, taking up an evening routine, and adding in other aspects that will help you fall asleep faster and sleep better. The fourth pillar is stress management. This centers on how well you bounce back from stress and adversity. Once you know what causes stress in your life, you can do what you can do to make these responsibilities automatic rather than tasking is what can help reduce stress. So, for example, if cooking and meal prep as part of the first pillar of lifestyle medicine is not something that's enjoyable for you, one thing to have a more well-rounded and less stressful weekly agenda is to set up a menu. So that relieves the pressure of meal planning and while still incorporating a healthy lifestyle. So the fifth pillar is avoidance of risky substances. Tobacco and alcohol can have negative effects on mood and overall health. So minimizing the use of these substances can improve mental and physical well-being. And finally, the sixth pillar is positive social connection. So this is important as it includes building and maintaining positive relationships with others as well as yourself. So as you can see, a lot of the six pillars are interrelated in different ways, and we will hopefully discuss that a bit more and just also more high level of what lifestyle medicine means in practice, both for doctors and for patients. So lifestyle medicine focuses on educating and motivating patients to change personal habits and behaviors around the uses of these pillars and aims to treat the root cause of disease rather than the symptoms by addressing physical and social environments surrounding the patient. So that is that's the gist of lifestyle medicine. So hopefully that helps you, so those of you who are new to this. So now let's introduce, or we'll give a minute for each of the panelists to introduce themselves. So Amy, would you like to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. So hello, good afternoon from the UK. My name's Dr. Amy Bannerman and I am a junior doctor working in London. So for those of you that are from overseas, what that looks like for me is that I graduated from Cardiff Medical School back in 2015 and moved to London, where I worked for 5 years as a junior doctor. So I was working in hospitals mainly, and then started my general practice training, which is so the family practice training scheme in the UK, where I sort of over that time really developed an interest in lifestyle medicine, specifically looking from my interest at physical activity and what that looks like both in sort of prevention, but also what that looks like in terms of how we can better manage and treat chronic disease. So I undertook a diploma in sports and exercise medicine to get a bit more background in that area. But it really was sort of a catalyst for me to look a bit more at lifestyle in general. And what I came to the realization of was that I understood disease in terms of from a clinical perspective, but actually we don't really understand health based on the training currently. So I took a role at Imperial as a clinical teaching fellow with Dr. Pinder, who's also on the panel, looking at creating the first lifestyle medicine and prevention module that sits within the medical curriculum at Imperial. So we've been working on that now for the last 2 years. And during that time, I've transferred from general practice training over to public health training, because I very much see the link of lifestyle medicine with the sort of wider determinants of health. And it's very much, for me, a piece of a very important puzzle of improving health and reducing chronic disease. So I'm very excited for the panel discussion today, and I'll hand over.
Thanks so much, Amy. Lovely introduction. We're so excited to have you. Next up is Dr. David Katz.
Well, thank you, Ali, and thank you, Joseph, for getting us started so well. Pleasure to join with Amy and be part of this panel. Nice to be with all of you, whoever all of you are, wherever all of you are, whatever time of day it is, wherever you happen to be. Do look forward to the times when getting together actually involves being in the same place at the same time, but this will do for now. Nice to be with you. So I'm a past president of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. I as the accent might suggest, from the other side of the pond, born and bred in the US of A, born in California. My dad was in med school at UCLA back then, lived most of my life in the Northeast. Trained in internal medicine initially, completed that residency, was not satisfied that I'd spend the rest of my career trying to put out fires that never needed to get started. Basically recognized during my training in internal medicine, 8 out of 10 people in hospital beds had stuff they never really needed to get. And for those of you training in medicine or thinking about training in medicine in the audience, I had the notion that we were learning how to be the king's horses and the king's men from the famous nursery rhyme, right? Remember that they never quite managed to put Humpty Dumpty together again. So we had a lot of technology at our disposal, but we were never in the business of restoring fully intact vitality. And that was a frustration. So I did a second residency in preventive medicine, public health at Yale, and got stuck at Yale University, where I held faculty positions in medicine, public health, and at the School of Nursing for a number of years. Directed medical studies in public health, was a residency director of a combined training program in internal medicine, preventive medicine, and founded Yale's Prevention Research Center in 1998 and directed that for over 20 years, where we were focused on translating what we know about lifestyle as medicine into what we do. I won't belabor the intro much further, except to say this, that the trajectory of my career was altered by a single publication. I completed my training in preventive medicine in 1993, presumably in June. That's when programs wrap up. And in, I believe, September of that year, but certainly within a matter of weeks or a few months of my graduation, a paper was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association entitled Actual Causes of Death in the United States by Mike McGinnis and Bill Fagey. It might just as well have been entitled Actual Causes of Death in Modern Countries Around the World, because we share common epidemiology. And the eye-opening revelation in that paper was that everything we write down on death certificates about causes of death doesn't really constitute causes at all. You know, when someone dies of a heart attack, you can say the cause is atherosclerotic disease of the coronary arteries, but what you're really left wondering is, yeah, but what caused that? McGinnis and Fagey answered that question. And overwhelmingly, the answer was lifestyle factors. In fact, just 3: bad use of feet, forks, and fingers. So tobacco use, lack of physical activity, poor diet, accounted for 80% of the premature deaths in chronic disease. That changed the course of my career. I thought I can't spend my career asking the next erudite question, seeking some unknown answer, when we could eliminate 80% of premature death in chronic disease just by fixing 3 things we know plenty about already. And the rest is history, and we'll get into all of that later. The other thing that I want to say is I'm a friend of Saray Stancic, and I never quite know how to pronounce her name, friends though we may be, and was privileged to be involved with Code Blue. And I'll do my best to stand in for Saray, who couldn't make it today because of a last-minute family emergency. So good to be with you all.
Thanks so much, David. That was a great introduction, and I love the concept of bad use of feet, forks, and fingers. That's a catchy way to remember that. And also, I'm glad that as Dr. Stancic.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm not the only one who has that problem. Again, we need her here to set the record straight.
Yeah, she can. she'll have to reply into a comment with the phonetics of how to say it, but we apologize, and I'm glad to know that maybe it's not just me. All right, so now with our third panelist, Richard.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning, wherever it is you are in the world. My name is Richard Pinder. I'm a public health doctor by background. So I'm a consultant. I've been a consultant now for about 5 years, working in London predominantly. And I'm also now the Director of Undergraduate Public Health Education here in the School of Public Health at Imperial. So yeah, I'm not sure I can follow that, David, in terms of my background, because I think my experience has been far less deliberative or indeed planned. And I certainly come at all of this from a sort of a public health point of view. I remember working in hospital medicine for a few years and sort of just getting incredibly frustrated that the same patients kept on bouncing back to us, and just thinking there's so much more that we could potentially do. And at the same time I was working, I started off in military health, looking at the consequences of the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts. And so got really interested in epidemiology, preventive medicine from there. And then I sort of landed at Imperial back in 2010 as an academic clinical fellow. And I've sort of had bits and pieces going on here for the last 10 years. But for the last 3 years, I've been working to try and embed population health, public health, global health, whatever it is you want to call it, in the undergraduate medical curriculum. We have a big medical school here, 360 to 400 students over 6 years of the program, so a couple of thousand students in total. And I've been working with Amy, who's very much been the brains, motivation, and muscle behind our lifestyle medicine and prevention module. So yeah, really excited to meet you all, and yeah, had a fantastic time. I actually replayed the Code Blue documentary a couple of times to get to Dr. Stancic's pronunciation, because I thought I'd be too embarrassed today if I couldn't pronounce it. So anyway, well,
helpful. Now you said it straight.
But very nice to meet you all.
Oh, lovely. I'm so excited to have you all here. Thank you again for offering your time. And Joseph, unless you have anything else, I was going to get right in to the first question.
I suppose just a slight tangent. If anyone has any form of questions, please make sure that you post them in the chat function, and then we'll get them answered when the panel Q&A is opened to interaction. Over to you, Amy.
Yeah.
Oh, Amy.
Great. Yeah, thanks. That was a good reminder. Please feel free to put your questions in at any time. All right, panelists. So for our first question, it's a bit of an icebreaker to get to know you guys a bit more than even just the introductions you just gave. You guys mostly touched on how you ended up in lifestyle medicine and your approach to practicing, but I would like to hear a little bit more about why you think lifestyle medicine and prevention is so important, and like the main differences between practice now and what you think needs to be incorporated to bring together the pillars of lifestyle medicine into medical practice. And why also are some reasons do you think that isn't practiced as widely around the world today as it should be? And it might sort of be a free for all of who goes first.
Well, I want to be respectful of my colleagues, but if the silence is going to extend, I'm happy to jump into the breach. So the interesting thing about what we do, and I'm not seeing the audience demographics, so I don't know how many are health professionals. Others are just interested to listen in, but let's assume we're all connected to the health profession one way or another. We talk, certainly this side of the pond, we talk about a healthcare system, but let's be honest, it's not a healthcare system. It's a disease care system. A healthcare system would involve high quality food and restful locations and relaxation and recreation, physical activity. It would involve things done to enhance the quality of relaxation for good sleep. It would facilitate healthy social interactions. And we can think about infrastructure associated with those things. We've got spas and gyms and restaurants that serve high quality food. And none of that is part of the disease care system. The disease care system is hospitals and clinics and stethoscopes and syringes and so forth. So lifestyle medicine kind of looks at that and says it is conceivable to have a healthcare system where what we're interested in is more than just ex post facto reaction to disease after it develops, but actually doing something to help cultivate vitality at its origins. However, the profession, which originated here in the United States, and not all that long ago, we're really talking about a lineage that goes back just a couple of decades altogether, but the founders of this started at the other end of the spectrum. Now, I'm board certified in preventive medicine. It's always made sense to me, if you want to peddle, you want to propound the value of prevention, you don't talk about keeping healthy people well and all the stuff that won't happen, because there's no drama there. It's invisible. See that heart attack that never happened? Isn't that exciting? It is actually, but invisibly so. What you do is you start at the other end. You do tertiary prevention. Say, here are people with significant burdens of disease, and effectively applied prevention will improve their quality of life, reduce their costs, prevent calamity, keep them out of the emergency room in the hospital. And lifestyle medicine began that way as well, with a focus on things like the Ornish and Esselstyn approach to reversing coronary atherosclerosis. So Dean Ornish, as many of you may know, published groundbreaking research to show that a lifestyle intervention could actively regress coronary atherosclerosis. Caldwell Esselstyn at the Cleveland Clinic has shown much the same. And then, of course, there's been a significant evolution in the peer-reviewed literature over years since then. One of my favorite examples is the diabetes prevention program, which shows that lifestyle is twice as good as the best drug we've got at preventing the migration from high risk for diabetes to type 2 diabetes. We have related studies that show the reversal of type 2 diabetes, on and on it goes. So the argument that set the profession of lifestyle medicine in motion is this is medicine. This can be used to treat disease. This can be used to reverse disease. We're not just talking about keeping healthy people well. But then I think there's a community that has formed around this. And by the way, this is the fastest growing medical college in the United States. The membership in the American College of Lifestyle Medicine since my tenure has grown by more than an order of magnitude. I mean, it's really quite stunning, and it continues to grow on an exponential trajectory. And part of the reason is this is the only medicine that can do both of those things: cultivate vitality and keep people fully well, and treat and reverse major disease. And it's always relevant. So no matter what other medicine you may need, lifestyle has a role to play. And it's the only medicine you can pay forward. You get a prescription for a drug, you're really not supposed to share that with all the other members of your family. But if you adopt lifestyle practices that cultivate health and well-being, actually you just fortify their impact on you by paying them forward to the people you love. In unity, there is strength. Their adoption makes you stronger. You're contributing something to them. Think about what parents want for their children. We want them to live long and prosper with vitality. So lifestyle as medicine is the opportunity to share that with loved ones, and on it goes. The other thing, I don't want to belabor this further. There's much more that could be said. One other thing that I find very compelling, quick anecdote. The best friend I've retained throughout life, we went to high school together. We've been friends and rather like brothers ever since. He's a wildlife veterinarian. He's an endowed professor now at Cornell University, where he oversees wildlife conservation. And for many years, he's been nagging me about the fact that, I'll put it in his words, Dave, are you sure you're on the right team? You're busy extending the lives of the species that is destroying the planet for all other life. And although he was, being glib, to some extent, he really had a point. And most of what medicine does contributes nothing to the overall health of the planet. But what lifestyle medicine does absolutely can. The environmental footprint of our diet's massively important to climate change, our preservation of aquifers, preservation of biodiversity, a shift away from meat-centric and animal food-centric diets, massive implications for how we treat our fellow creatures. And physical activity has an opportunity to do a lot of the things we rely on, fuel-powered engines to do, and there again, a massive contribution to the planet. We use bikes a bit more and cars a bit less. So this really is at the confluence of disease care and healthcare, of treating what's broken and preserving native vitality. It offers the opportunity to treat both the one and the many because it can be paid forward. And it's the one aspect of medicine where we actually can be doing something both about the health of people and the health of the planet all at the same time.
Yeah, wow, thank you. That was a great answer. Richard or Amy, do you guys have anything to add, maybe with the perspective of like the UK healthcare system having a completely different structure?
Yeah, I think it was fascinating to watch the Code Blue documentary, because while you hear about the difference in systems, it's actually to sort of see it firsthand was something. It was a really great insight for me. In terms of why do I think lifestyle medicine and prevention is important, I think I could go on for days, but I won't. So I suppose in a similar sense of what David has said, where I read a paper that sort of changed how I was thinking. It was back in 2015, and it was written, put out by the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges, called Exercise is the Miracle Cure, back when we were using exercise as a term rather than physical activity. And I think one of the things that has really stood out for me, or what was one of the notions that really stood out for me that sort of changed how I was or wanted to work in the future, was sort of the realization that this generation of children is the least active that we've ever had in the UK. So knowing what we know about, physical inactivity, along with other lifestyle behaviors which can be detrimental to health, we do know what the alternative is. And lots of people, when talking about lifestyle medicine, say, why is it important? Well, there isn't an alternative. Actually, there is, but the alternative to me is not, we need to be working differently, and it very much needs to be happening at a large scale pace. And I think in terms of why aren't things happening on a larger scale, sort of globally, that's a massive question. In terms of in the UK, we are starting to see a shift and actually a real need from healthcare professionals about practicing lifestyle medicine, to be upskilled, to have this enthusiasm for practicing in a different way from how they've been taught. So I think one limitation is around training, but also very much a point that I'd like to speak to in the UK is the serious time pressure that doctors are under in the States. And I was watching the Code Blue documentary, and just the thought of having a 2-hour consultation with a patient was amazing. We get 10 minutes here. So it's about making what we have, shaping what we have for the future. So how do we practice differently? But also, what do we do now in terms of what can we do in terms of brief advice, very brief advice in consultation with patients. So in terms of, how it looks in the UK versus the States, it's probably very different, but I think everyone is sort of speaking to the importance of this as a movement.
So the way I would describe, because I spent the last 2.5 years, I guess, sort of struggling and puzzling over what lifestyle medicine really is, because I think it can mean lots of different things to different people. And actually the last 2 years have kind of demonstrated that, depending on who it is you speak to. And the way I always like to think about it is that I started off as a clinical doctor dealing with patients. Then when I moved into public health, which I think is broadly the same as sort of that, well, it's definitely a bit of the preventive medicine plus something slightly more, is that I moved up to populations, and suddenly my 316,000 residents in my borough in southeast London, they became my patient as a population. And the way I think about lifestyle medicine is that in some ways this is me coming home. This is me now taking that learning at the public health level and then bringing it back down to a clinical level. And actually, a lot of the stuff that we do is kind of public health, but in a very clinical, very individual sort of way. And I haven't come at this easily. I'll be totally honest, and David, it'll be really interesting to hear the American perspective on this, but the pushback I get from a lot of my public health colleagues is when they think about lifestyle medicine, there is this sort of quackery, as we define, I'm not sure if that translates across the pond, but quackery in terms of dodgy, pseudo-scientific type stuff, vitamin infusions, sort of, drink boost type type things, and it's all slightly sort of what we would describe as sort of Harley Street private practice. And I think the perspective that I've been trying to bring to all of it is, with Amy, is kind of thinking about, well, what are those core lifestyle medicine skills that we'd want all of our future doctors to have from Imperial, and just sort of explain the background for everyone on the call. We're now delivering lifestyle medicine and prevention as a module across 2 years of the program, and it's now 20% of our syllabus for the first 2 years of the medical school. So we've been really thinking about, well, what is it that our future doctors need to do? And I think it is about everything David has said. It's about health and positive health rather than disease, but really trying to skill these people up. And again, recognizing the most sort of tenuous link, I guess, is, David, as you've described, that sustainability, planetary health agenda, and how you then pivot into that sort of global health, planetary health type levels. There's so much there. And what was really compelling on the documentary when I watched it yesterday was just the motivation of the students. And, you know, lifestyle medicine, I feel, is of its time. It's the right time. It's what, you know, our junior doctors, our medical students want to do. So I think we've got a fabulous opportunity, but just to sort of the proviso for my public health colleagues who might be watching, the way that we're teaching it certainly over here is very much rooted in a population level approach about inequalities and recognizing the physical environment and those broader social determinants of disease, whilst accepting and reflecting the fact that obviously there is individual agency, and behavior change is definitely at the center of that.
Richard, good comments, and several things to react to. First of all, quackery does translate across the pond, and there's nothing about lifestyle as medicine per se that is remotely quackish. You know, again, it's venerable. We all know that Hippocrates said, "Let food be thy medicine, medicine be thy food." This reverberates through the entire history of medicine as a profession, but inevitably, you put anything out in the real world, it picks up lint. And so, you know, lifestyle medicine potentially overlaps with a lot of alternative medicine, much of which, by the way, is also not quackery. I practiced evidence-based integrative medicine, worked side by side with naturopathic physicians for 15 years at a remarkable clinic. We published a number of papers, actually presented to the Institute of Medicine. And the issue simply is, if we're honest with ourselves, that human need, I took care of patients for 30 years, human need goes on long after the results of randomized clinical trials run out. And the question becomes, you know, what do you do there? So this is a topic for another day, but there is an argument for creative applications of what might be deemed complementary or alternative when you have run out of what's in the textbooks. It hasn't done the job. Patient didn't react like the textbook said they should. They're still suffering. You know, how do you then do the next reasonable thing? So again, topic for another day. But because of the overlap, because naturopathic medicine, for example, emphasizes nature and diet and lifestyle, but then also extends into the realm of energy therapies and botanicals and so forth, not all that surprising that lifestyle medicine might look like an appealing place to moor your boat, and consequently then some of the less creditable or scrupulous members of some ancillary professions start to become the lint, if you will, on the house of lifestyle medicine. So to be clear, there is no quackery in the value of diet for health. There is no quackery in the value of exercise, avoiding tobacco, on and on it goes. And there is value, too, in much of the realm of holistic, alternative, complementary, integrative care, but there is bathwater along with the baby. And in particular, if you're reticent about something, so if you practice conventional medicine, you're not really interested in these newbies shaking things up, you know, you disparage. You basically, you focus on the lint and you ignore the baby, you focus on the bathwater, right? And I imagine if quackery translates, baby and bathwater, I hope, translate too, you have to separate the two. So lifestyle medicine, really, for those of us who respect scientific evidence, but also recognize the need for medicine to evolve and get better. Look carefully to differentiate baby and bathwater. And I think all professions need to guard the division between the two. All are subject to the conflation of the two, in particular by opponents. And, you know, Gandhi famously said, first they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. That's sort of where lifestyle medicine is. So it was a joke at first, but it's the fastest growing medical college in the United States. So now critics are getting a bit more strident because now they're really worried but we're going to win because it's the right thing to do. One final thing, Richard, I mean, you nicely emphasized the divide between a public health approach and a patient care approach. And I'm steeped in both, 30 years of patient care, but trained in public health. I've written multiple editions of a leading textbook on epidemiology and public health. My entire career, I viewed both the individual and the population as my patient. But here's the thing. When I was president of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, it was pretty much all about lifestyle in medicine. And Ali, I don't know what your views are on this, but I argued there is lifestyle in medicine, that's clinical, and there's lifestyle as medicine, and frankly, that's cultural. You look around the world to see the populations that benefit the most from lifestyle medicine. They don't have terrific doctors. They have a culture that makes eating well normal and being active normal and sleeping enough normal and mitigating stress normal and good social interactions normal and not smoking normal. And we have a name for those particular cultures that do the best, courtesy of Dan Buettner. We call them the blue zones. So in Sardinia, Italy, Ikaria, Greece, Okinawa, Japan, Loma Linda, California, the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, we have the highest concentrations of people who live to be 100 with intact vitality anywhere in the world. And none of them says it's because my doctor's terrific. They don't go to doctors. They don't need doctors. So where lifestyle is the most effective medicine, culture is the spoon. And I would say, some of the resistance we get from the house of medicine is also because of that. Hey, we can't do this. I can't fix somebody's diet. I don't have that kind of time. The documentary, which of course tracks the story of Saray dealing with her own multiple sclerosis in part. So, those of you who haven't yet seen it, it's a human interest story as well as a medical interest story. So, it really is about how medicine is and how it ought to be and the transformative potential of lifestyle medicine. But it's also transformative in the director's life because Saray Stancic is a physician who has multiple sclerosis and used lifestyle medicine to restore her own health, and then thought, well, what are the greater implications of that for other people, for the world at large? I would argue that ultimately where we all come together is we want lifestyle in medicine to do all that it can do, and it can do tremendous good, and we can dig in there. But I think we also want lifestyle as medicine, and to some extent, our greatest contributions there are as activists, as motivated and enlightened citizens who advocate for the kind of healthy public policies that make it easier for everybody to access the vitality I think we would all contend they deserve.
And so just to build on that, I'm interested to hear the American perspective, but I think, as a public health profession, we've largely failed to educate most medical students about public health in an engaging and relevant way for many, many years. And I think lifestyle medicine is a bridge into that space to actually get a lot of that population level and public health understanding there in a much more sort of relevant way. But interestingly, actually, the way that we started off, and I don't want to turn this into a sort of medical education discussion because I know that's not what this panel is for, but one of the reasons actually that we sort of have gotten away, so to speak, with getting so much what we're terming lifestyle medicine and prevention into the curriculum here is that the medical school identified there was an acute need to train future doctors in a way that actually they preserved their own health and they practiced, positive lifestyle behaviors. And actually, that's been a very, very big part of how we've been delivering the curriculum in terms of actually really trying to get the students to grapple with the challenges of whether it's sleep, whether it's to do with financial well-being, mental health, physical activity, nutrition. That's actually been a tremendous way of getting in and also creating that deeper level of empathy so that students can empathize with their patients. And we started off trying to communicate it with the patients so the students would reflect it back on their own behaviors. What we've discovered is that actually Generation Z, or whatever group this is, they're much more reflective than certainly my generation. They're really happy to talk about their own health and their own behaviors in a way I would never have been happy to do so at medical school. So I think that lifestyle in medicine has a slightly different, an additional meaning, certainly from the way that we've experienced it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Richard. We had discussed that a bit when we spoke a couple weeks ago, and I was going to ask you to build on that. So thank you. I actually am going to ask another question to prompt a little bit of a different side of what what I want to discuss today. Although I also did want to touch on, I think it's great. A lot of my research, I didn't go too far into it, but is about climate change as well and sustainability of our diets and the food system. So it's exciting. I don't think that's for a whole other panel conversation on another day that we could really talk about for a long time. But we'll stick to fundamentals of lifestyle medicine today.
Recommend this. Yeah. Great book. Sam Myers at Harvard, Howard Frumkin. And this is about the direct human health effects of planetary health too. So that, yeah, I mean, it's a confluent area for sure.
Yeah.
This is great. Highly recommended.
Great. Thanks. I'll give it a read. All right. So the next bit I wanted to move on to. So I know maybe not everybody watched the film, but 20 minutes into the film, another guest doctor, Dr. Neil Bernard, talks about his time in medical school and says that cigarettes were sold in the hospital and physicians would smoke in the lounge. But after the link between smoking and lung cancer was uncovered, one of the first real epidemiological discoveries, cigarettes were pretty much immediately removed from vending machines in hospitals. So the film talks about that there's parallel science for the link between unhealthy foods and disease. So it seems pretty clear that improving food options in hospitals would be a step in the right direction for promoting lifestyle medicine. So this is two-part. It's something you guys touched on a bit, but I wanted to dive deeper into. So first of all, why do you think these changes aren't being made? And then in an ideal world, what policies and what policies do you think need to be implemented? And what do you think governments need to do to optimize the impact of lifestyle medicine practices? And this will be interesting too, to hear maybe some of the differences between the UK and the US systems. Maybe we'll, anyone can start, but maybe we'll start with the UK perspective this time. So
Yeah, so I think it's a really good point. And I can contrast a couple of experiences actually in the States. I did a sub-internship at Johns Hopkins, and I remember certainly it was fast food all the way, with the exception of a sort of a sushi bar. And then I've been out at Kaiser on the West Coast the last few years as well, and they have fantastic kind of food, healthy food built into the hospital system. We've tried that here. And we get slightly differing results, really. I remember sort of, it was never my portfolio area, but I remember working where I do. We were trying to get healthy vending machines into our sports centres in South London, as well as into the offices where I was working. And it was so difficult because there were lots of bizarrely important commercial interests in terms of the fact that healthy food either didn't sell, wasn't as profitable, or some other particular reason. And so there are initiatives across London. I think the Whittington has been doing quite a lot of work, as has Bart's Hospital, Bart's Trust in the East End, where they're trying to make that hospital food more healthy. And whilst that might be working to some extent on the patient-facing side, the extent to which it's possible to push those things through easily and not massively antagonize staff is a slightly different matter. And that, I think, is where we've come a cropper to a large extent. I have to admit, for anyone who watches Parks and Recreation, that the character I actually identify with, which will probably horrify the rest of the panelists, is sort of the Ron Swanson character. I'm afraid I'm not a vegan. I do like my unhealthy food. And I think it really is a challenge putting that into practice. It's very easy to sort of come up with these ideas. It is very, very difficult to get it in place eventually. And the extent to which you then sort of expend your political capital on those sorts of opportunities, which are to a large extent sort of, I think, signalling rather than actually determining more fundamentally the sort of the health outcomes of your institution. It's a real challenge that you have to weigh up.
I think as well, in terms of just some of the hospitals that I've been at in London, there are few initiatives that are sort of moving forwards, but something that I just wanted to pick up upon was during the pandemic, there was lots of local businesses that were delivering healthy food options for the staff during their long on calls, and that was a really positive example of where local communities can actually feed into these healthcare systems. They don't have to be, huge lorry delivery to all the same hospitals and it's all the same food. Actually, it was locally sourced food. It was made by people in the local area that were supporting the healthcare system. And I think that's a really sort of valuable point that we've learned, among with many other things during the pandemic, but actually how the local community are willing to be involved and to be sort of involved in those partnerships. And a couple of hospitals will have initiatives and things where they have local farmers markets outside on particular days. And again, varying success, but it's a really important link, I think, that we need to be making with healthcare and the wider community.
And I would go back to the contention that there is a fairly fundamental divide between clinics and culture, and there shouldn't be. I think clinics should be in the vanguard of culture change. We should fix what's broken with regard to health, but we should be leading the way, advocating for what does in fact cultivate vitality at its origins. But the current system is a disease care system. And so having a McDonald's at the entry level and the coronary care unit, one elevator ride up, inevitably, not the stairs, perfectly normal. And in fact, maybe even by nefarious design. You guys profit by selling the stuff that produces the atherosclerotic plaque in the first place. We profit by fixing coronary arteries after they get gummed up by what you sell, and we both laugh about it all the way to the bank. I hate to think the world works that way, but sometimes I shudder and I wonder. The basically big food and big pharma are all in on it together and perfectly happy with the status quo. I would recommend sometimes stepping outside our discipline for a broader view of the world. And some of you may have read Daniel Quinn, Ishmael, Story of B, Beyond Civilization. The books are a little quirky in a sense, but they're also they're quite illuminating. And in those books, which are really about the degradations of our planet, human avarice, among other things, and the notion that the planet belongs to us, he talks about the murmuring of our culture, the constant murmuring of culture telling you what's okay and what's normal and what's right. I think most people simply look past junk food. It's perfectly okay that junk is conflated with food. Junk is a food group where everybody's fine with that because we're bathing in it. And so, you walk through a hospital lobby and there's a McDonald's, you don't think twice that that's a glaring incongruity, that, this is propagating the disease, selling. And as Neil talked about in the documentary, it might have been doctors smoking or the selling of cigarettes, but the idea that what we're doing as our lifestyle is at odds with health. And then when stuff breaks, we fix it. That's medicine. Again, that's all really a derivative of that misguided divide between clinics and culture. And again, we go back to the origins of medicine, Hippocrates. The argument was they really ought to be one and the same, that prevention and health promotion intrinsic to the value of the medical endeavor. But we lost that. It was essentially unsanctioned with the Flexner Report, which was the foundation for medical education in the 20th century. I keep waiting for the 21st century analog to the Flexner Report, right? Amy, I don't know whether in your training you were a beneficiary of culinary medicine. Did you get that training?
No, it's starting in the UK, but only in a few centers.
Just get started, yeah. But, our successors will routinely. So we got nutritional biochemistry because that was, the Flexner Report. Basically, that you need biochemistry and you need anatomy and you need physiology. You don't really need to know how to talk to people. And you certainly don't need to know how to help people live a healthy lifestyle. That just wasn't in there. But, that's because in the early going of the 20th century, we're trying to fix, nutrient deficiencies and trying to understand pathophysiology. It all made sense. But 100 years later, where most of what's wrong with most people in the modern world, the plagues of the modern world, when we're not in an infectious disease pandemic, they're all plagues of chronic debilitating diseases that owe almost everything to lifestyle at odds with human need. And how can you call yourself a health professional and not address the most important drivers of health differentials? It doesn't make sense. So that's got to be baked into medical education. Trouble is that, essentially everybody's carved up the available time and space, and, department chairs are very territorial. If I've got to give up histology so you can teach people how to eat better, hell no. That's going to be the answer. So we've got territoriality and territory disputes. We've got an antiquated approach to medical education that made sense a century ago. It's completely, it's an anachronism, but there has been no formal effort to overturn it. There is this fundamental divide between what ought to happen in clinics and what ought to happen in culture. And then there are these nascent efforts to bridge that divide, like culinary medicine, which basically says you want to help people eat better. And Richard, you made the point, maybe we need to focus on teaching healthy lifestyle to the medical trainees. Doctor, heal thyself first. And then when you see that it actually works for you, pay it forward. Colleague of mine in preventive medicine, Erica Frank, has published extensively on looking at health practices in health professionals and how that then translates into what they do or don't share with their patients. A really important area. But culinary medicine says, hey, let's teach you how to cook healthy, delicious, convenient, economical, family-friendly, schedule-friendly meals. And then when you're done with that, here's the laminated recipe card you take home with you. Pay it forward. Share that with your patient. Do not talk to them about biochemical pathways. That will not help. That's a favorable development, and we can do both. We can learn about biochem. I think we should. But then we also ought to learn, but that's not going to translate when you're talking to the average person who needs help with dinner tonight. Do not waste their time with biochemistry. Give them a recipe.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. Richard, if you have something else to add, please.
Yeah, so I was going to ask David a question. I think, well, first of all, I agree with you in terms of the culture. As I've kind of matured as a sort of an attending equivalent, I definitely do see more of that sort of signaling thing as being more important than perhaps I did a few years ago. So I take that point. But Amy and I constantly get, well, not constantly, but we frequently get challenged on the whole issue of inequalities and the extent to which a clinically driven lifestyle medicine model, David, potentially exacerbates inequalities, because the people who are going to come to who are going to have the money and the time to come to a lifestyle medicine consultation are typically going to be the more affluent members of society. And likewise, what we're failing to do is to mitigate the impact of food deserts, the fact that, for everyone on the call, the fact that, there are large swathes of our inner cities where you just can't get good value fresh fruit and vegetables. David, how do you respond to criticism if you've had them stateside?
Yeah. And those of us in public health are deeply concerned about disparities, and the last thing we want to do is widen those divides, Richard. But I also think it's a potential formula, and maybe this too is by design. Very clever people who are encouraging our apathy. If you can't fix it where it's unfixably broken, don't fix it anywhere, and don't even show what's possible. And that way we'll maintain the status quo, which for those of us making money from it, perfectly fine. I mean, I do sometimes wonder about the formula. So, I think there are remedies to all of this. I mean, first of all, we subsidize all the wrong foods. Certainly in the U.S., massive subsidies for animal foods, massive subsidies for crops used to feed animals, no subsidies for fruits and vegetables. There are programs that are changing that and making healthy food, which is arguably among the best of medicines, affordable for all through our what used to be called food stamp, now SNAP program. Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Basically, there are subsidies for fresh produce, so the price points come down. I think the shift to telemedicine, which was happening anyway, but has been massively accelerated by COVID, is a potential democratizer. Pretty much everybody's got a smartphone. Maybe not everybody's got great Wi-Fi access, but almost everybody's got cell service, certainly throughout the United States, even in really poor areas. And the digital delivery of lifestyle medicine is well underway. I'm an entrepreneur now. I left academia after 30 years to run my own company. We're on a mission to make diet a vital sign, and we are delivering what we do at Diet ID to federally qualified health centers. I mean, we're preferentially addressing people and providing diet advice and ethnically relevant coaching with regard to nutrition, right? I mean, that's part, we have to be culturally sensitive. It's not just about economics, it's also about ethnic diversity and so forth. But all of that can be built into digital systems, and it can be built in there far more efficiently than into a clinical practice where, hey, I don't know a lot about a Latin diet or a South Asian diet. Well, you can teach your app, and then it's just a switch in the app, and I want an optimal diet in a Latin style, or an optimal diet in a South Asian style, or Chinese style, whatever it may be. So we're working on that. The whole field of digital therapeutics has the potential to democratize the delivery of lifestyle medicine. I think in some areas we need creative solutions that address issues of infrastructure. It's a big focus right now in the Biden administration, and rightly so. They're asking questions, with this interesting and tumultuous period of political transition in our country. Questions are being asked about what is infrastructure. Is it just railroads and bridges, or is it the social supports that allow people to know that their children are well cared for while they're at work? Well, I think we could take it a step further and say, what is the relevant infrastructure solution to food deserts and food swamps? And, among the things that occurs to me is, let's take Meals on Wheels, which is a remedy for people who are homebound and can't get out to food, and give it a serious upgrade and make it high quality eating on wheels for everybody. And, we're talking about mobile units. If we're not going to get the major supermarket chains to build a supermarket in a food desert, let's wheel it in and, basically have fresh produce on an electric powered vehicle that bring, again, you start to think about how the various elements of vision come together. I also do think, Richard, that sometimes it is easier to fix something in a population that is more resource replete, and it isn't always wrong, because sometimes you're proving a principle, and what you want to do is say, okay, yeah, we alas, we're going to peddle our wares to the receptive, and that means people who hear us, find us, have the discretionary cash to buy what we're selling. But if we can show this does amazing stuff there, that then becomes the data-driven argument to say everybody deserves this. Look what it can do. Now, what are the impediments to getting it to everybody else? Quick example there. Again, in my life now as an entrepreneur, we are collaborating in what we do, which is essentially digital dietary assessment, diet coaching. We're collaborating with meal kit companies. Well, meal kit companies, some of them produce very high quality meals and will send it to your door. So you're spared the inconvenience of having to, shop for the ingredients and make the meal, right? Lovely, tremendously convenient, but expensive. And so the obvious reaction is, okay, so, the rich get richer. The people who really least needed help to be healthy have yet another asset to help them be healthy. Okay, well, what if, though, we're right about lifestyle as medicine? What if we're right about food as medicine, that it doesn't just save lives, but because it's improving health dramatically, it reduces costs related to disease care? What if it's more economical medicine than medicine is medicine? Because the alternative to food as medicine is not nothing. It means business as usual. Everybody gets, fat and sick, and basically a fortune is spent on drugs and surgery. So we've developed an ROI calculator that shows you can pay for the food and still save money if you meaningfully improve diet quality because of what you're doing to incident diabetes, incident coronary disease, incident hypertension, the avoidance of pharmacotherapy. So now the argument becomes, okay, to get at those disparities, let's not make poor people pay for their medicine. Let's make food as medicine and take our data to third-party payers and say, this will cost you less than pharmacotherapy as usual. You need to cover food and lifestyle as medicine. You will save money. Your profit margins will go up. The people who need the help most will get it and avoid chronic diseases. And those of us in the business of making this model available actually can make a living doing it. So lifestyle medicine thrives. Everybody wins. I could keep going, but again, I like the provocation. You're exactly right to raise it, but there are answers to it. It's not an insoluble problem.
I think as well, just to mention on that point, with the challenge that we get for lifestyle medicine at Imperial, we very much focus on the health inequalities as part of the teaching. And I think that is fundamental when we're talking about lifestyle medicine to have that as part of the conversation. And it's really reassuring to see that happening, you know, in the US and in Australia and in Canada. And I think one thing I do wonder is, as a public health sort of profession, in terms of policy, when we think about what drives change from a policy level, in the UK, there's recently been changes around sort of policy to do with obesity, not necessarily kick-started, but definitely pushed forward by the interlink with COVID and severe COVID. So I wonder whether actually, as a specialty, whatever specialty that is, whether it's healthcare, whether it's public health, we are doing enough to be able to advocate for this at a policy level. And I know that there are challenges and there are, you know, difficulties with that, but actually this isn't something that we can just have business as normal for the next 50 years, because the rate at which things changed during the pandemic has shown us that we can do things at pace and we can do things well at pace. So it would be an excellent opportunity to be able to sort of map that out across other services as well, particularly in terms of sort of the policies that we need to see be moving forward.
It remains to be seen, Amy, whether we get clarity on the pandemic, because the world bungled the response to the pandemic horribly. The UK was terrible. The US was arguably the worst in the world. But it's just been a mess. And it's a topic for another time. But I think the reason it's been such a mess, first great pandemic in the internet age. We had an infodemic that made thoughtful reflection damn near impossible. You basically had to declare your allegiance to a tribe almost instantly. Misinformation flowed even faster than the virus. But if we do manage to get perspective, among the things we'll understand is that there is an acute case for chronic vitality. There's an acute case for chronic health, because the greatest vulnerabilities were associated with the prior pandemics we were ignoring. All the stuff, lifestyle-related stuff that was hiding in plain sight. There's a good paper, Dariush Mozaffarian at Tufts is the senior author in Journal of the American Heart Association, looking at the potential preventable burden of COVID casualties in the US if we had addressed the prior burden of cardiometabolic disease, overwhelmingly related to lifestyle. And the estimate was 60% or more of total hospitalizations and deaths could have been avoided, not by direct defenses against COVID, but by having addressed cardiometabolic liabilities that were here all along. And you're right, all of that gangs up on disadvantaged populations. So they have the greatest burdens of cardiometabolic disease. They have the least resources to defend against acute threats. I'm hoping the acuity of COVID focuses our attention on that and invites the kind of innovation that we require to overcome the challenges that Richard is highlighting. They're really important. We've got miles to go before we sleep, Lord knows. I mean, nothing but widening disparities have been seen, certainly in the US over recent years. I think the UK is similar. And that's a failure of public health, but largely it's a failure from the outside of public health to respect the imperatives of public health in the first place. And the pandemic maybe is an opportunity to shift that perspective.
And I really like what you've said there, David, around the sort of the false dichotomies that have accrued during this pandemic and this sort of polarization that we see more generally in society. Because the way I try to come back with the whole sort of, well, what have you thought about inequalities? What about the population level issues? What is the issue to do with agency and wider determinants? Is that I don't see lifestyle medicine as an either or with a population level approach or a public health approach. I think the two are complementary. They overlap. And it is very much the sort of one person being set against the other, which I think is what creates a lot of the friction with some of the other specialties too.
I think that's a really important last point too, with that this lifestyle medicine isn't to replace the practice of modern medicine, but it's something that needs to be practiced in addition to it. So yeah. One thing I wanted to ask before, we'll go to one final question from me. And then we'll move on to the Q&A. But actually, before I get to my last question, I just wanted to see if we could quickly touch on what do you think like governments should do? Because I think we touched on it a little bit with subsidies, but is there anything more you can add to that, like with what you think government involvement should be? I know that's generally a controversial question, so I'm interested to hear your perspectives.
Well, shall I kick off? So I'm deep down a health systems sort of person, and this whole issue to do with, as we've discussed, the sort of the agency, what is government's role. I started off in public health as being much more and probably about as libertarian as you can get in public health, and I've definitely softened my view in terms of there is clearly a role for government in this. I would say in this country that I think the real opportunities, it's fascinating what David said there around sort of leveraging the HMO type mentality, because you've got the sort of the risk held by the insurer in the United States. That the fundamental challenge that we have in public health beyond the sort of generic system leadership challenges is the segregation of budgets. And the fact that you've got the National Health Service that is responsible for picking up the pieces, and then you've got a tiny public health budget that potentially is meant to prevent stuff. But because you can never realise the savings because the budgets aren't properly pooled, spending in one area doesn't result in a saving in the other to the same person. And the real opportunity that I think government needs to grasp hold of is really sort of trying to bring together what I would describe as the trinity of health and well-being, which is the public health system, the healthcare, the NHS system in England, and then the social care system. Yeah. And if government can begin to actually pool the incentives and create actually positive, virtuous cycles across those, then I think we have a real opportunity to do something fantastic, because prevention is very much there in the current plans for the NHS in England, but no one's quite sure what it really means or how to do it. And lifestyle medicine is an opportunity in that space.
Yeah, I think that's key.
I would highlight the relationship between form and function. Government is an agent, and so it's a form. And I think the question in every instance needs to be, what's the function? So, as an example, I don't want to have to ask if I'm buying a loaf of bread whether or not there's arsenic in it. For all I know, arsenic might make the crust crustier. But I want to know that there is no arsenic, because you're not allowed to put arsenic in food because it's recognized as a poison, right? So whatever it does to bread or French fries or crisps, or I don't want to have to query, each time I purchase that some known toxin isn't being used in my food because it's good for the seller but bad for the buyer. That's a government function. That ought to be regulation, rules, policy. On the other hand, I don't think government should be in the business of telling people what they are allowed to have for breakfast within a range of reasonable choices, right? So I think the better place to begin the conversation is with function. What are the functional components of the optimal delivery of lifestyles medicine? There are things individuals ultimately need to do. I do believe, even though we have massive disparities, I believe in personal responsibility, right? I mean, if society were to pave the way to better health, then, for everyone, you'd still need the will to walk it. You can't expect to be carried, right? You still got to get there. So I don't believe where there's a will, there's a way. Sometimes there's the will and there just is no way. It's society's obligation to pave the way. There has to be a way. The choices every individual makes are always subordinate to the choices all of us, the body politic, has. And so, government needs to be in the business of leveling the playing field, making sure that everyone has access to good choices. Some of the things we were talking about before. Some of that's got to be policy. Some of that's got to be regulation. Not because, you're liberal or conservative, want more government regulation or want less government regulation, because sometimes it's the right remedy, right? So again, form following function. And I think to avoid political friction, and the last thing we want is we champion a movement that has the potential to add years to lives, add life to years, and maybe help save the planet into the bargain. The last thing we want is to slow progress and momentum because of political resistance. So, if we overreach and want government to just mandate everybody must eat, a whole food plant-based diet, for example, I mean, the rebellion will tear our house down. So we don't want to do that. I think we need to be very artful in asking the questions, where is the agency here? Is it the individual? Is it the family? Is it some organization, schools or churches or worksite? Is it a community? Is it at the state level? Is it an industry? Is it the employer? Is it a payer? Does it have to be government because we need the rising tide here to lift all boats? And I think if we're artful in allocating to each entity the function for which it is the suitable form, we can maximize the progress and advantage and minimize the political resistance. It's a vague answer in a sense, rather than saying government should do this and this and this. But I think if you operate within that framework, that falls out of it. Okay, so in this particular instance, who should do this? We could look at each instance, line it up. What is it we want done? If we want delivery vans in disadvantaged communities, providing access to fresh produce, and we want that to happen fairly universally, yes, that should be a government action, but maybe what government does is provide tax incentives and subsidies to encourage employers and insurers and local communities to take ownership of that, right? So maybe there are multiple agents involved in that. But again, I would start with what is the function we want to see fulfilled, and then let's examine the relevant forms, and let's try to implement the forms in support of function that will minimize friction and resistance.
I think as well there's something around sort of timescales on this kind of work. So I'm not sure, can't speak for the States, but in the UK, you do tend to see change with relatively short timeframes in terms of the work that we would be trying to do with lifestyle medicine, which would be sort of a systems change as well as at an individual level. So I think there's something around being realistic about the time frame that this does need to change now, but it's not going to change overnight. It didn't happen overnight. So I think there's something there as well.
Yeah. And then I'll wrap up. Oh, sorry. But with any other things can be added into this. But I just want to go around to all of the panelists, and before we move on to the Q&A from people in the audience, I just wanted to see your guys' answers. If you have one suggestion for our audience members today to take away and help them promote the ideals of lifestyle medicine to their communities, what would it be? Maybe Amy, do you want to start on this one? Put you on the spot.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic that so many people have tuned in, and I think stay curious with it. I think there is an element of, as we were talking about, there is there will be pushback from colleagues around this. It is new, but being sort of curious and critical about what we're doing while actually sort of exploring this as a specialty, it's a really exciting field, and it's really, I know I'm biased, but it is a really exciting time to be involved in the specialty. So yeah, I'd just keep going, pursue it.
Richard,
yeah, go on then. So, well, I'm going to say I'm going to build on what David said there. I think, which is that I guess for me the question I was going to ask, actually, and I'm sure we can come on to this a little bit later on, is what does the workforce really look like? Because the culinary medicine challenge that I always have is that you watch the Code Blue documentary, and it's lovely to see the medical students in there, doctors going shopping with their patients, but in the NHS that is very unlikely, I think, to be mainstreamed would be the polite way of putting it. And I think my perspective on all of this is that don't be precious about, as David has said, around the form. Think about what is the function that you can deliver within lifestyle medicine, because I think everyone has a role within this. And I think what we need to be careful of is that we don't end up putting it into a box and saying only such a person can do this, because actually we've all got a role.
Good answers. So here's what I would append. We got to the moon. We got to Mars. Apparently, we're sending probes to Venus to look for microbes in the atmosphere or some damn thing. Human ingenuity is capable of wonders if we are passionate. So I would look for the passion. And I think I wrote a paper in the American Journal of Health Promotion years ago, facing the facelessness of public health. So, at least Richard and I are both flag waving, public health practitioners, but there is no public. The entire discipline is predicated on a fiction that there's something called the public that's separated from you and me and our families and everybody else, and there isn't. The public is a mosaic. The public is, essentially an anonymizing veil draped over individual human beings. And if we part that veil and see the faces back there, then when we talk about an 80% reduction in chronic disease and premature death, it's not some bland statistic that evokes no feelings whatsoever. It invites you to think about the people you love who've had a heart attack or stroke or cancer or dementia or diabetes. It invites you to think about the days you got that news, the times you had to go visit them in the hospital. It invites you to remember whether they recovered and came home or sometimes never did. And it invites you to imagine a world where 8 times in 10, that didn't happen. Those people never got that stuff. They lived in full vitality to 98 and died in their sleep, because in the blue zones, that's the routine experience. People live long, prosper with vitality, and go gentle into that good night in the fullness of time. That's possible. So the passion resides in recognizing the possible and in personalizing it. Again, I am a public health physician too, but there's a real liability in that because nobody loves the public. We love one another. We love other people. So I think if you are looking for ways to advance the opportunities in lifestyle medicine, perceive the full scope of what's possible. 80% less chronic disease and premature death in the world as you know it. 8 times in 10, no heart attack, no stroke, no cancer, no diabetes, no dementia. That is possible. And then personalize that. Think about how it would have reverberated through your life, and that will be your motivation.
Thanks, you guys. Thanks for wrapping up that part of the panel discussion. And those are great answers. So I'm excited for people to take that away. I know I definitely will. So the next part is Joseph, will you take it away with any of the questions that have come in from the audience?
Yeah, of course I can. So the first question that I'm just going to flag up here is from Aldert. And I'm a sports physician from the Netherlands. And how sure are you about the 6 pillars? One could think of other pillars: behavioral, spiritual, and happiness orientated. So I just thought whether there should be more inclusive aspects to the 6 pillars.
Well, others are certainly welcome to us. Ali, you're the one who said what the 6 pillars were, so this puts you on the spot. But again, as a past president of the American College, these are general expressions that are reinterpreted many times over. So, for example, my 6 pillars, I routinely say feet, forks, fingers, sleep, stress, and love. And by love, I mean everything related to social interaction. All love is good love, friendship, community. And spiritual community is intrinsic to that. So I say love, but Dan Buettner of Blue Zone fame talks about spirituality, because specifically has noted that in the Blue Zones, there tend to be strong spiritual communities, whether religious faith or some other practice. So I think what we want to be careful about is whether we're just picking alternative nomenclature and talking about the same things, or if we're really leaving something out, right? I also, because it rolls off the tongue, feet, forks, fingers, sleep, stress, and love. Well, if you think about both love, which is health related to interaction with other people, and stress, which is anything that puts a burden on your mental outlook, mental health is essentially covered, the social aspects and the individual aspects. But some people might argue you've got to have mental health in there, right? But so some of this, I think, would be debate about, well, is it really 6 or is it 8 or could there be 11? Or, we've sort of settled on 6. And then it's a matter of choice of nomenclature, and there are alternative words you could use. But it's also a matter of thinking about how broadly you want to interpret these things. So again, I've got an expression of the 6, but I don't think they exclude the important points you're making. I think it's just a different set of labels, but we're talking about the same things. And we certainly agree the same things are important.
Yeah, thank you for that, David. And like I said, well, like you said, I'm the one that chose to use the pillars as my introduction to lifestyle medicine. So to I'm totally in agreement. I think these, I think they are a good way to teach about lifestyle medicine, but it's an important point being brought up that there's a lot of interpretation around it, and it's not meant to be just strictly, I guess with talking about the example of food and diet, like it has more about the culture and your behaviors, and so all of the pillars sort of bleed into other things and exactly encompass what your Elder brought up as well. And I think a good point, and then as a different example, the positive social connection, which David calls love. I think this really overlaps with like spiritual connection and happiness as well. I think that's all encompassed there. And there is a big point in interpretation of these things, and that we need to teach this in a way where people are understanding whatever or taking on what they see as their positive social connection. So the point is that it's something that, brings love or happiness or togetherness into your life. And that doesn't have to be like, for me, it's a running club and less of a religious group, but for other people, it's different things. So I think that's a really good question and a really good point.
And by the way, I don't know whether Richard and Amy want to, but one other thing to note here, because it's a good question. Even how you express, even if we agreed on the pillars, how you address the pillars is highly variable. It should be personalized. I've frequently, I've tried, I actually know Deepak Chopra, but I've joked for years that, I'm just horrible at meditating. My meditation goes like this. How many emails could I be answering now? How many? I mean, I just can never focus. I always think about work I could have been getting done. However, I love nature. I have 2 dogs who've been in and out of this room as I'm speaking. I have a horse. I love hiking. I love vigorous exercise. That is stress relief for me. I don't do stress relief separately from that. I love my wife, hugging my wife, and so the love is a stress release. But the physical activity is probably my go-to remedy for. I can't meditate. I probably should, but I've never mastered it. But a hike in the woods, meditation. Riding my horse, meditation. Romping with my dogs, meditation. That's my church. That's my meditation. So yes, it's spiritual and it's stress relief. So I think we have to allow for that too. These things matter to everybody. But how you practice them and how they matter and how you derive the benefit, I think different strokes for different folks.
I think that's as well an important point about mentioning that it's because even the language does change even between the colleges. So the American lifestyle medicine, Australian lifestyle medicine, they all have slightly different nuances on how they interpret things, but actually the messages are the same. And I think that's really important in moving this forward across all these different networks, is that the messages are the same, and actually the messages aren't new. Lifestyle medicine as a concept is new, but the messages aren't. And I think that's important in terms of sort of taking it forward with patients as well. It's really that sort of personalized element, what works for that person, and it giving us and sort of the same prescription, if you like, would be completely wrong for someone else. But it's about that process, and I think that the pillars are a good scaffold, but actually the depth that you go into that can change.
It just shows Amy and I have been working together for 2 years. I was going to say almost word for word what Amy has just said. But I think the thing that's been striking for me, because I've said to Amy, I don't know how many times over the last couple of years, Amy, are you sure we're teaching the right thing? Are you sure this is lifestyle medicine? And I think what's been really actually relieving, if nothing else, as in whenever you're in a room with real, lifestyle medicine experts, is that everyone settles on broadly the same things. They have slightly different perspectives and different ways of presenting it. And certainly, it would be more challenging for me to present love as one of the pillars with a group of biomedical cells and molecules, imperial medical students in their first year. But I think we're all agreed. It is the core things that keep us healthy and happy.
And happiness has come up now, has been mentioned a number of times. And my immediate predecessor as president of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine was Liana Leonov, and she would argue passionately that happiness has to be one of the pillars. We know that optimism is a very potent predictor of health outcomes. So again, we can debate the nomenclature, but I think we can agree about the fundamental principles. I think you're quite right, Richard. The nomenclature that's preferable to use varies with the audience. Basically, if I do choose to use love and I'm before an erudite biomedical audience, I have some explaining to do. It might just be easier to talk about mental equanimity. But in any event, I know what I mean and I know what matters, and so we can parse different ways. But the priorities are shared. And I think we do need to allow for a certain latitude in how they are practiced. And I think if we allow for, variation in nomenclature and variation in practice, then exactly which set of terms we use matters less. We're clearly on common ground.
Yeah, I remember we had a meeting, Amy, didn't we? And I was trying to get you guys, the rest of the team, because we've got a few people on the team, and I was testing you guys to see whether you were happy with me using the word happiness. And I think the consensus view in the team was that I shouldn't use happiness. It was a little bit on the social science side.
Too touchy-feely, right? Yeah. Well, Liana would beg to differ.
Those are brilliant answers, and thank you very much. I suppose we'll move on to our next question, which is from Alex Spears. He is a PhD candidate within the centre, and he's studying adolescent mental health epidemiology. His previous experience as a teacher, I know my colleagues are really interested to hear what parents and teachers can do in terms of mental health disorder prevention or interventions for teenagers who are a vulnerable age group for mental health disorders from a lifestyle medicine point of view. So again, the panel is yours. The podium is yours, rather.
So I think that's a really challenging question. And Alex, given you're a teacher, that definitely the work I've done with schools is that teachers sort of get quite frustrated when we just see, well, you can just do this as well as the rest of your job. So I'm always extremely mindful of, whilst recognizing teachers as part of the wider public health workforce, it's not necessarily what you're actually paid to do. So I'm always very conscious of that. The way that we've tried to look at these sorts of things, certainly in the teaching that we've done in the medical school, is to think about transitions, because that's really important. And secondly, to also think about the sort of the build-up of multiple different factors. And trying to think about that constellation of subclinical risk factors, and thinking how we can sort of take at an early stage identification and mitigation of some of those impacts, I think is one of the things that we can certainly do a lot better with in our wider public health, clinical, and particularly medical workforce, in terms of making sure that where there are risk factors, whether that's to do with substance misuse, adverse childhood experiences, sexual identity, all sorts of other issues, we pick that up early and then we give them the means of referral or intervention. But it's an incredibly difficult area. And I would defer to a child and adolescent mental health expert before going too far out of my area of expertise. But looking at the questions, all of these are outside my expertise, so I'll shut up.
I do think, though, in terms of sort of from a lifestyle medicine perspective, it's a really important age, that teenage stage, because that's where they start to form those behaviours. So actually anything that is promoting a healthy lifestyle in those spaces is tapping into that network of actually this is how our peers behave. So in terms of mental health disorder development specifically, I think that's quite a niche question, but actually thinking about the pillars of lifestyle medicine, that's a really important time to be quite clear on what health is and what health looks like for that person, because actually those behaviours that are formed in that age are likely to be behaviours that stick with them unless there's a point of change. So I think it's a difficult one in terms of what specifically can they do. There's no sort of checkbox answer from my perspective, but I think that's what I would say is that age group, promoting health and promoting those healthy behaviours in that age group can't be undervalued.
Can I just come in on that? So the evidence, I think, from the public health perspective is that it's definitely sort of social interventions which are very effective within those groups. But I'm intrigued to see, because on the one side you could say, well, what we've tried to do is demedicalize a lot of that activity, because actually putting it into the hands of kind of the expert medics has not historically been the most successful approach. But to what extent are we then remedicalizing it by introducing it within lifestyle medicine? I don't know.
Very good answers, I think. Provocative question. And, I would be careful about exaggerating the hegemony of lifestyle medicine. So, for example, what is the lifestyle medicine approach to adolescent mental health? Well, the best approach to adolescent mental health was always lifestyle, right? I mean, it was always probe for mental health problems and provide good counseling and support. That is effectively more lifestyle medicine than anything else. I mean, we certainly don't want to think that, anytime you ascertain anxiety or stress or alienation in adolescents, immediately use pharmacotherapy. So, there are aspects of standard medical practice that are more rooted in lifestyle, human interaction. Psychotherapy is about human understanding one another, probing for the origins of problems and trying to address them there. So, the idea, what is lifestyle medicine's answer for this very challenging space? I think, again, exaggerates a despotism of lifestyle medicine. We now need to claim that no, that was, that was always being handled more right than wrong, and the effort was always to identify the origins of mental anguish and to address them there. So I think that's one. Richard's point about not asking teachers to do more, I think is a really good one. I have a quick anecdote there. It's a really interesting story, but it would take too long to tell in its entirety. But suffice to say, I've raised 5 children to adulthood, my wife and I have. And when my son was little, he was a very rambunctious little guy. He's now a beautiful young man studying engineering at Northeastern University. But when he was 5, he just could not sit still. And he inspired the development of, and he could have very easily been slapped with a label of, hyperactivity disorder and given Ritalin or something, but he was perfectly fine, just needed to run around. And, I was really upset about the notion that we took naturally rambunctious kids, sent them to school, bolt them to chairs all day long so they could grow up to become adults we couldn't get off couches with crowbars. And if they complained about it along the way, we gave them pharmacotherapy for a disorder we invented. So we devised a program called ABC for Fitness, Activity Bursts in the Classroom, where we surmised that if we worked with teachers, we could do a better job than simply telling teachers, here's one more thing you ought to do. So that's what we did. We built it collaboratively and said, look, you need kids that are well-behaved, that pay attention, that listen. And you can't do that for 6 hours straight with 7-year-olds. The kids need physical activity, and if they get to expend some of that pent-up energy, they will be better in the classroom. Anyway, bottom line is we developed this program, studied it in randomized trials, published a number of papers, and then gave it away. And it's been implemented by thousands of educators all around the world. And it breaks physical activity up into brief increments throughout the day that can be folded into any pedagogical program. So the teacher basically is able to manage this in the classroom, get a better environment. We showed that it reduced medication use by the kids, preserved academic performance, enhanced behavior in the classroom. Fewer kids got sent to the principal. I think we can collaborate in those kinds of remedies. And then if we do, I think the question becomes, just as physical activity is a stress relief for me, what are some of the ancillary things we could do to enhance the overall structure of children's days that are preventive for some of the ailments that would otherwise tend to develop in adolescence? The final comment I would make, and I don't think any of us has an answer to this, is the internet and social media are an uncontrolled experiment. And I think they're wreaking havoc on all of our psychology, and most acutely adolescents. And if anybody's figured out the solution to that, I've yet to hear it. But it's a huge problem. We're interacting in whole new ways. People are subject to the constant glare of an entire world looking at their Instagram photos and trying to be as perfect as they possibly can be, and comparing themselves not to reality, but to perfect pictures of other people's lives that are taken out of the context of the reality of their lives. Huge, huge burden for adolescents, and a problem that all of us collectively as a society need to work on solving. It's not an isolated problem for lifestyle medicine.
Thank you very much for your brilliant answers. Moving again and staying with the theme of psychology and neuroscience, Nicole Curtis has asked a question with regards to, is there any correlation between lifestyle medicine and improving or slowing the effects of Alzheimer's disease? This may be out of your field.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Happy to jump in. I would refer you to the work of the Scherzais. This is a husband and wife team of neurologists, Dean and Ayesha Scherzai. They have devoted their entire career to the application of lifestyle medicine to preserving mental resilience and cognitive function. And I personally, I'm not convinced there's a 30-day Alzheimer's solution. We really don't have strong evidence that if Alzheimer's develops, that the pathophysiology can be entirely reversed with lifestyle intervention. But there are studies of that ongoing. Randomized trials are now looking at the power of lifestyle medicine to arrest the development of Alzheimer's. But what we do have very strong evidence of massive deviation in general outcomes related to rates of dementia and cognitive decline with age in populations that practice different lifestyle patterns. So look into the Scherzai, Scherzai, and their work is quite compelling. I flashed at you their book that is a compilation of their work, but their work populates the peer-reviewed literature. Dean Scherzai spent many years at the NIH. These are serious biomedical researchers who are parlaying their life's work into what can be done to preserve cognitive function. It's not a perfect remedy yet, but it's quite potent. And the challenge here, of course, is that lifestyle medicine often works best when implemented early. So if you wait until there's already evidence of dementia and say, okay, what can lifestyle medicine do? It may very well be able to do something. And again, that's where the randomized trials now are focusing. But I suspect it can do a whole lot more if it begins decades before there's any sign of worry about cognitive function, because then it's building all of the healthy biological infrastructure to preserve optimal cognition for as long as possible. But the simple answer is yes, there's a powerful effect.
I think as well, the study completely escapes me right now, but in terms of sort of the physical activity element, there is strong evidence for cognitive lack of cognitive decline related to sort of as little as 20 minutes of a walk a day at a moderate or even a slow pace. So that I'll have to have a look at where that's from, but there is evidence for that. Whether it's specifically for Alzheimer's, I'm not 100% sure, but definitely in terms of cognitive health.
Sure, and once you circulate that paper, I'll be sure to share it to the individuals that have asked, or Nicole that has asked the question. Moving on to a little bit more of a more controversial topic, and thinking about the rise of certain more culturally influential people. Notably, there are a few esteemed individuals noting the influence of a carnivore diet. Carl de Sosa asks, you were speaking about the rise of extreme dieting throughout the documentary, and I was just wondering, what's your response to the carnivore diet?
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Richard.
I was going to say I would always be very cautious, and I think the nutritional evidence base is actually one of the biggest reservations I had about lifestyle medicine at the start, because there are a lot of sort of potentially perverse incentives, lots of risks of confounding, and all sorts of others. I don't know anything about the carnivore diet, so I shan't pretend to know. But I generally do take the view that moderation and the basics is the way to go.
I have to admit, I had to Google the carnivore diet, even though it's quite self-explanatory in the title. In terms of sort of my take on any sort of diet, as it were, that would exclude or lean towards just one food group, I don't know why that would be beneficial in health. In terms of the principles of a healthy diet, I don't think that needs to be packaged as a diet and shouldn't be. So in terms of sort of moving more towards a healthy lifestyle, the carnivore diet, I believe, is just meat, which no, I can't say I would. I haven't read into it, but I don't think I would ever be advocating for something that was purely one food group.
So I'm going to be a bit more adamant here than my colleagues, and I know a lot about it, and I've spent my career focused on nutrition. This is one of my recent books, really good for holding a door open in a stiff wind, 750 pages, The Truth About Food. I'll also, but before I get myself worked up about this answer, remind you about this. This is not my book. It's just a great book, Planetary Health. There are no healthy people on a ruined, ravaged planet, inhospitable to our kind of animal. And one thing a carnivore diet guarantees at scale is we will accelerate the demise of biodiversity, aquifers, rainforests, and everything else that matters ultimately to human well-being sustainably on Earth. I don't think there should be any conversations at all about diet that are at odds with planetary health. I think it's just silly. I would go further and say, I don't think you can call yourself a health professional in 2021 if you don't advocate as frequently and fiercely as possible for the health of the planet, because it is the bedrock on which all other health stands. Again, quite simply, I'm a physician, but there are no healthy people on a ruined planet. Everything about our health will be dragged down with planetary demise, and a carnivore diet will accelerate that. So it's a non-starter. Even if it were a good idea for our kind of animal, it would be a non-starter at an age when there are 8 billion hungry Homo sapiens to feed. Period, end of story. If there were 10 million of us wandering around in a great big empty world of inexhaustible resources, it would be a different story. We can't really even have the conversation now. The seminal Eat Lancet report, which looks at what human beings need to do to stay within sustainable boundaries, estimates that modern countries, UK and US included, obviously need to reduce average meat intake by about 90% if we want to stay below 1.5C and stay within sustainable boundaries and enable our children to have diets as fully intact as ours. So it's a non-starter. And by the way, I've been privileged to call as friends and as members of a council I put together for my nonprofit, the True Health Initiative, some of the leading experts on the paleo diet, including the founding fathers like Mel Konner, Boyd Eaton. When this first emerged in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1985, it was Eaton and Konner who wrote about it. And they agree. It's moot now. Dorothy, we're not in the Stone Age anymore. The other thing about arguments for the carnivore diet, they completely fail to consider, if you want to argue that human beings are natively adapted to eat meat, you have to examine what kind of meat we're natively adapted to eat. Very quick example here, and Ali, feel free to cut me off if I'm going on too far about this, but just quickly, this is again, Eaton and Konner in their published work have compared modern meat to Paleolithic meat. And here's a very quick, for instance. They estimate that wild antelope best represent the composition of Paleolithic meat, the kind of animals our ancestors would have eaten. So if you look at antelope steak, 7% of the calories come from fat, virtually none of it's saturated, and much of it's omega-3. You juxtapose that with an average cut of steak from steer for beef, 35% of the calories come from fat on average, five-fold difference. Much of it's saturated, none of it's omega-3. You can call them both meat, but metabolically it's night and day. So now the question becomes, do you think there are enough antelope on the planet for 8 billion hungry Homo sapiens to go out with a bow and arrow and catch them routinely? Or are we talking about CAFOs, basically concentrated feeding units, factory farming? Because the other thing is, if you do factory farming, you massively alter the composition of the meat for the worse. And you're now talking about people eating bad meat. You're also talking about torturing animals at an unimaginable scale, which has nothing to do with the native human experience of hunting live animals that were out there living their lives and then suddenly died. We're talking about incarceration from birth, abnormal circumstances throughout life, and I could go on and on. So I think this is another space where I would argue there is a basis for passion. Now, we can also remove the ideology and say, not everybody needs to be vegan. You can optimize the quality of any kind of diet, including paleo. But one of the things all good and sustainable diets have in common is they emphasize real whole foods and plant predominant. But plant predominant diets could leave room for wild fish and grass-fed cattle and maybe even some game, and maybe even go hunting and feed your family that way. I'm not ideologically opposed to that, but the idea that we as responsible public health professionals should be advocating for a carnivore diet, it's a non-starter, even if there were a physiological argument, but there isn't, because the massive evidence we have, and I say this as someone who's just wrapped up the 4th edition of a nutrition textbook for health professionals, the massive evidence we have says that all of the populations who live long and prosper with vitality eat plant predominant diets. And that's the opposite. So, no, we have not done the randomized trial for 80 years to see how long do people live if they eat the carnivore diet. We have a massive evidence saying the people who live longest and thrive the best eat plant predominant diets. That's the antithesis of a carnivore diet. The burden is on carnivore diet advocates to prove that they can rival what we already know plant predominant diets can do. So for those and other reasons, I'll spare you. I vote no.
Can I just clarify as well? The carnivore diet is just meat, isn't it? It's
right.
Nothing else.
Well, yeah. It's a variation of it, right? So there's paleo and there's keto, but the claim to fame, and that by the way, that's how you gain fame and notoriety in the diet space, is you outdo everybody else. You become more radical. There was low carb, not good enough. We're going to be ketogenic now, right? I mean, you basically have to reinvent what was already out there and make it sound even more extreme. Exactly. So yeah, carnivore eating would be right. Channel your inner lion.
Yeah, thank you for your response. I thought that was for everybody's response. I thought that was really interesting. I actually had not. I mean, I could piece together what the carnivore diet was as well, but I had not heard of it, and it is quite extreme. But it's interesting to know. I mean, just talking about how the industry today is, or how the food system is today. People are eating meat, which is in the form of beef or steer, and I didn't even know the differences with talking about antelope. So it's really interesting. And I've always come from. I ate a vegan diet for quite a while, and I realized that that's extreme compared to what most of people would accept. But I think I always used the same sort of analogy of I think it's most appropriate to eat the amount of meat that you could go and get yourself with a bow and arrow, prehistorically. But I know that argument also doesn't really work for many people. But anyway, it was very interesting, everybody's responses. I think that we are going to wrap it up. Joseph, was there one more question you wanted to post in? I think we could have time for one more, but
I think we just have about enough time for one more question.
All right, let's do one more.
So it's from Alicia, and she suggests, obviously, thanks for sharing your expertise. What role do you think highly processed meat/dairy alternatives beyond meat, vegan cheese, etc., have in people's transitioning to plant-based diets? So what role do you think they play? Highly processed meats play in, highly processed dairy and meat alternatives play on helping people transition to a plant-based diet.
Well, this is definitely in my wheelhouse, and I've written about it. So jumping quickly, we don't know. I mean, you didn't ask, are they a good idea? You didn't ask, is getting people who are inclined to be carnivorous eating plant alternatives a good thing? And I would say, interestingly, in talking about meat alternatives, I'm always tempted to quote Meatloaf, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. You guys all know the song, I Trust, right? So there are 3 considerations here. Is it better for your health? Is it better for our fellow creatures? Is it better for the planet? Well, 2 and 3 are clear yeses. And I've conferred with environmental health experts. The environmental footprint of meat alternatives is less than the environmental footprint of beef with regard to greenhouse gas emissions, water utilization, land use, etc. So better for the planet, and no animals are being abused in the process, so better for our fellow creatures. Is highly processed meat alternative better for you than highly processed meat? Probably. Is it better for you than really clean, lean meat? Maybe not. It's a lateral move. Maybe you're even trading down. But you asked a different question. It's a good one. And I think the only honest answer is we don't know. What is the role of these in transitioning people to a plant-based diet? In other words, will these act as gateway drugs? You know, that once you eat the highly processed meat alternatives, do you say, and now I'm starting to feel like I could maybe actually eat beans and lentils? You know, as someone who eats a nearly plant exclusive and highly plant predominant diet and actually loves beans and lentils, these highly processed meat alternatives hold no interest for me. But I'm not the target audience. The target audience is someone who really likes meat and isn't going to give it up if the only way to give it up is to just give it up. But if you create a substitute that satisfies, and oh, by the way, you can have your meat and eat it too, in the sense that, you know, it tastes like meat, it feels like meat, but less cruelty involved, better for the planet. It's pretty clear, given the growth of those companies, Beyond and Impossible and their competitors, that there's a market for that. What does it lead to? Do people stay there and say, you know, I want highly processed meat alternatives for the rest of my life? Or do they transition, as your question suggests? Remains to be seen. Nobody has conducted that experiment. But the hope would be it's better for the planet and better for our fellow creatures, even if they stay there. For their personal health, if it can be used as a gateway to, okay, you know, this was plant stuff made to seem as much like meat as possible, and the next step is plant stuff that actually seems more like plant stuff, I'm willing to give it a try, that would be great.
Yeah, so I defer to the much more erudite answer. I mean, I'm sitting here wondering what antelope tastes like, I have to admit, because it's approaching dinner time. But the comment I would make on this point, I think, is the issue as to how we message it. Because I think what we have to be really careful about is that we don't come across as sort of absolutely radical in such a way that we actually antagonize the general public. Because much as I like meat, and I always like the plant dominant or plant predominant diet, because that's definitely something that I could buy into. The idea of doing it exclusively is probably, at least where I am right now, a step a little bit too far in the distance. And I suspect I'm further along the path than most of the general population. So I think how we communicate that and how we transition, I think, really is the key word. It's about setting, you know, the thing in motion, and then hopefully over time we can get there.
I think as well, out of all of the pillars, the sort of nutritional pillar is always the one that it feels more emotive, and there's lots more, you know, it brings in a wider discussion. But I think one of the ways forward is sort of having quite a compassionate approach to it. And I think that happens as part of these kind of discussions. In terms of when I think of sort of patients that when you're working with one-on-one, I think the state seems like it's much further along in that sort of personal health coaching towards a plant-based diet than we are currently in the UK. So I think very much at the stage in the UK of sort of meeting that patient or that family where they are, and actually working out what is the small change that you can make today that, as someone highlighted in the comments, that can move you along to making more positive health change. But food is always sort of a good point of conversation, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it brings up a lot more controversy than some of the other topics. Yeah, people have, I don't know, less strong opinions on whether being more active is something they should do, or being more, or, you know, having positive relationships. So I think that it's a really complicated or a difficult one to discuss.
Yeah, and by the way, the audience deserves to know, it really shouldn't be. There is a very clear theme of what's good for our kind of animal to eat. And Michael Pollan pretty much nailed it in 7 words: eat food. So real food, not pseudo glow in the dark, Frankenfood, you know, eat actual food, not too much, mostly plants. And you know, I've devoted much of my career to chasing that wild goose everywhere it led, and, you know, written textbooks on it and peer-reviewed papers. I did a 2014 review, Can We Say What Diet is Best for Health? I mean, that's fundamentally right. And everything after that is ideology and someone trying to sell you something. But that theme is important. And then the question becomes, what is the context? And again, there might have been an opportunity to debate the merits of a diet with lots of wild game in it when that was plausible at scale. You could now say, there may be some rarefied individual who likes to hunt and is going to eat a variety of wild vegetables and wild game and be quasi-carnivore. But that has to be an isolated event. It's not public health guidance, because public health must be cognizant of impacts on the environment. I mean, we can't ignore social environment and planetary implications. So, the times we live in require that our counseling be current. That's not ideology. That's just a reality check. We're not in the Stone Age anymore. But roving bands of isolated hunter-gatherers in the Stone Age and 8 billion hungry Homo sapiens to feed are two radically different circumstances. And I think that's really important. But part of the reason diet seems so controversial, we've got these warring diatribes, is our culture thrives on dietary pseudo-confusion. I actually worked on air for Good Morning America for 2.5 years as a reporter, and they wanted me. One of the reasons I no longer work for Good Morning America, they wanted me to talk about a different diet every week. And in fact, if I pushed back and wanted to say the same thing 2 weeks in a row, I said, that's boring. No, I mean, if it was the cucumber diet last week, it's absolutely got to be the wildebeest diet this week and something else next week, and tune in tomorrow to find out how you really ought to eat. And everything we knew up until this morning was wrong. Some new renegade genius has just published the book that's going to change everything. That's all nonsense. I mean, in the blue zones, nobody is watching morning shows to figure out how to eat. They eat the way they've been eating for generation after generation after generation. So there really should be no media thriving on diet, and there should be no big publishing thriving on diet, and there should be no hyper palatable controversies about diet. But our society has created that, and a whole array of industries thrive on pseudo confusion about diet. And then once you propagate pseudo confusion, you invite radicalized opinion, which is of course amplified by social media. And here we are with basically members of every diatribe, aiming pointy vegetables or shank bones at one another, depending on their preference. And it's all a bunch of nonsense. Fundamentals of eating well are perfectly clear, but they require that we situate epidemiology ahead of ideology. Hard to do these days.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you guys all for that. I do think we will wrap up now, since we're about 1 minute left in the time allotted. But I wanted to say a quick connection of everything you guys just said, which wraps up along with what David just said. Maybe we should be having the government mandate that morning shows teach us new recipes about plant-based and healthy, well-rounded, lifestyle. I don't know, the recipes that would work for what we were talking about today, but also talk about other things. So maybe that's what the morning shows should do, at least here in the US. They dictate so many people's opinions. But anyway, I thought this was an amazing conversation. I want to just say another thank you to our 3 panelists today. It was so interesting to hear each of your perspectives, get a bit of differences across different countries, and hopefully this will help people better understand the work you guys are doing across the board and promote lifestyle medicine to a new group of people. So thank you so much again. And this will be up on YouTube to share with your friends. Everybody take a look at the papers and the work that all 3 of our panelists have done. It's really incredible. And thank you for joining.